Do you ever feel guilty about preferring a quiet evening at home over yet another social gathering? Have friends or family members questioned your choice to spend weekends in solitude rather than constantly seeking external stimulation? Today, we're exploring one of Carl Jung's most profound insights: the psychological necessity and transformative power of solitude. In our hyper-connected world, the preference for staying home is often misunderstood as antisocial behavior, depression, or even laziness. But Jung's revolutionary understanding of human psychology reveals something far more profound at work. He recognized that solitude isn't just a preference for some people. It's a psychological requirement for mental health, creativity, and authentic self-development. Jung distinguished between what he called introversion and extroversion, not as simple personality labels, but as fundamental orientations of psychic energy. For introverts, energy flows inward toward the inner world of thoughts, feelings, and reflections. This isn't a deficiency or social anxiety. It's how their psyche naturally functions. Forcing an introverted person into constant social interaction is like asking a plant to grow without roots. The modern world has created what Jung would recognize as a crisis of overstimulation. We're bombarded with information, social media notifications, work demands, and social obligations that leave little time for what he considered essential psychological work. The process of individuation, or becoming who we truly are. Before we dive deeper into Jung's insights about solitude, I want to invite you to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We're building a community of thoughtful individuals who value psychological depth and authentic living, and your support helps us continue exploring these transformative ideas. Jung observed that many psychological problems stem not from isolation, but from the inability to be alone with oneself. People who constantly seek external stimulation, who can't sit in silence without reaching for their phone or planning the next activity, may be running from something crucial: their own inner world. This avoidance of solitude often leads to what Jung called living an unlived life, going through the motions of existence without ever connecting with authentic desires, values, and purpose. The preference for staying home represents what Jung understood as a natural withdrawal into the inner realm where real psychological work happens. In solitude, we can process experiences, integrate new insights, and connect with what he termed the transcendent function, the bridge between conscious and unconscious minds that generates creativity, wisdom, and psychological growth. Jung's personal experience profoundly shaped his understanding of solitude's value. During what he called his confrontation with the unconscious, a period of intense psychological crisis and breakthrough, he withdrew from social obligations and dove deep into his inner world. This wasn't escapism. It was courageous exploration of the psyche's depths. From this period of deliberate solitude came some of his most revolutionary insights about human psychology. He discovered that solitude creates the optimal conditions for what he called active imagination, a state where the conscious mind can dialogue with unconscious contents. This process is impossible in the constant chatter and distraction of social environments. It requires the quiet, undisturbed space that only solitude can provide. When we're alone, without external voices demanding our attention, our inner voice finally has space to emerge. The modern misunderstanding of solitude as loneliness represents a fundamental confusion Jung would have recognized immediately. Loneliness is the painful awareness of being disconnected from others, while solitude is the enriching experience of being connected to oneself. Jung understood that people who are comfortable in solitude often have the richest inner lives and, paradoxically, the capacity for the deepest connections with others. Jung's concept of the persona, the mask we wear in social situations, helps explain why some people find constant social interaction exhausting. Maintaining a persona requires tremendous psychological energy. It means monitoring our words, managing others' expectations, and often suppressing our authentic responses to fit social norms. Home becomes a sanctuary where the persona can be removed, where we can exist without performance or pretense. The shadow, Jung's term for the repressed or hidden aspects of personality, also needs solitude to be safely explored. In social situations, we naturally present our most acceptable qualities while keeping darker or more complex emotions hidden. But psychological health requires integration of the whole self, including shadow elements. This integration work can only happen in the safety and privacy of solitude. Jung observed that creative individuals throughout history have required significant periods of solitude for their work. This isn't coincidence. Creativity emerges from the depths of the unconscious, and accessing these depths requires withdrawal from external stimulation. The greatest artists, writers, scientists, and philosophers have always understood what Jung articulated psychologically. Solitude is not the absence of stimulation, but access to the richest stimulation of all, the endless creativity of the unconscious mind. The choice to stay home often reflects what Jung would recognize as psychological wisdom, the intuitive understanding that inner work requires inner space. Jung's understanding of psychological types reveals another crucial aspect of the solitude preference. He identified that introverted individuals literally recharge their psychological batteries through alone time, while extroverts gain energy from social interaction. This isn't a matter of choice or social skill. It's a fundamental difference in how the psyche processes and regenerates energy. Forcing an introvert into constant social situations is like forcing someone to work without rest. Eventually, psychological exhaustion and dysfunction result. The process Jung called individuation, becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be, requires significant periods of solitude for reflection, integration, and authentic self-discovery. In social situations, we're constantly responding to others' energy, expectations, and needs. While this has its place, individuation requires turning attention inward to discover our own values, desires, and life direction. Jung emphasized that the unconscious mind communicates through symbols, dreams, and intuitive insights that often emerge during quiet moments of solitude. When we're constantly engaged with external stimuli, conversations, entertainment, social media, we miss these subtle but crucial communications from our deeper self. The preference for staying home creates space for what he called listening within. Modern psychology has validated many of Jung's insights about solitude. Research shows that people who spend time alone report higher levels of creativity, better emotional regulation, and stronger sense of personal identity. They also tend to have higher quality relationships because they come to interactions from a place of fullness rather than neediness. Jung understood this paradox. Only those who can be alone can truly be with others. The home environment itself holds psychological significance in Jung's framework. He believed that our living spaces become extensions of our psyche, filled with personal symbols, meaningful objects, and energetic imprints of our inner world. Home represents what he might call a temenos, a sacred space where transformation can safely occur. The preference for staying home often reflects an unconscious recognition of this psychological sanctuary. Jung also understood that solitude allows for what he called holding the tension of opposites. In social situations, we often feel pressure to resolve contradictions quickly, to have clear opinions, to present a consistent image, but psychological growth happens in the spaces between certainties. Solitude provides the container for sitting with ambiguity, for allowing multiple truths to coexist, for letting complex emotions and thoughts evolve without premature resolution. The guilt many people feel about preferring solitude reflects cultural conditioning that equates social activity with psychological health. But Jung's work suggests the opposite may be true. Psychological health requires a balance between social engagement and solitary reflection. Those who can't tolerate being alone may be avoiding crucial aspects of self-knowledge and personal development. Jung's concept of the collective unconscious provides another layer of understanding about why solitude feels necessary for many people. We're constantly absorbing the psychological atmosphere around us, the anxieties, expectations, and emotional states of others. This psychic absorption happens below conscious awareness, but can be overwhelming for sensitive individuals. Solitude provides essential time for what Jung might call psychic digestion, processing and integrating these absorbed influences without adding new ones. The modern epidemic of anxiety and depression may partly stem from what Jung would recognize as psychic overstimulation. Our nervous systems evolved for much smaller social groups and quieter environments. The constant barrage of social media updates, news cycles, work communications, and social obligations creates a state of chronic psychological arousal that makes rest and reflection nearly impossible. The preference for staying home represents the psyche's natural attempt to restore balance. Jung distinguished between what he called thinking and feeling functions in personality. For thinking types, solitude provides space for analytical processing, problem-solving, and intellectual exploration without social pressure to reach quick conclusions. For feeling types, solitude allows for emotional processing, value clarification, and authentic response to life experiences. Both types benefit from uninterrupted time with their preferred psychological function. Dreams played a central role in Jung's understanding of psychological health, and he observed that people who spend time in quiet reflection often have richer dream lives and better dream recall. The transition from social engagement to solitude creates optimal conditions for the unconscious mind to communicate through dreams, fantasies, and creative inspirations. Those who avoid solitude may be cutting themselves off from this essential source of guidance and creativity. Jung also understood that solitude allows for what he called active imagination, a dialogue between conscious and unconscious minds that can resolve inner conflicts, generate creative solutions, and promote psychological integration. This process requires the kind of relaxed, non-goal-oriented attention that's impossible in social situations, but emerges naturally in solitude. The preference for staying home often reflects an intuitive understanding of what Jung called the rhythm of the psyche. Just as the body needs cycles of activity and rest, the psyche needs cycles of engagement and withdrawal. People who honor this natural rhythm often report feeling more balanced, creative, and authentically themselves. Jung observed that many of his most psychologically healthy patients had learned to value and protect their solitude. They understood that time alone wasn't selfish indulgence, but essential self-care. They recognized that their ability to contribute meaningfully to relationships and society actually depended on regular periods of inner renewal and reflection. The spiritual dimension of solitude was central to Jung's understanding of psychological development. He believed that in quiet moments alone, we connect not only with our personal unconscious, but with what he called the self, the archetypal center of the personality that transcends the ego. This connection brings a sense of meaning, purpose, and inner authority that external activities cannot provide. For many people, staying home creates the sacred space necessary for this profound inner connection. Jung's work with mandalas, circular symbols representing psychological wholeness, emerged from his own periods of solitude. He discovered that when given quiet time and space, the psyche naturally creates images and symbols of integration and healing. This creative expression of inner life requires the undisturbed attention that solitude provides. The preference for staying home often reflects an unconscious recognition of this creative potential. The concept of introversion in Jung's original formulation was much richer than contemporary personality tests suggest. He saw introverted individuals as naturally oriented toward the inner world of ideas, emotions, and spiritual experiences. For these people, external social activities, while occasionally enjoyable, feel less real and meaningful than their inner experiences. This isn't social anxiety or depression. It's a fundamental orientation toward depth rather than breadth in human experience. If you've found value in exploring Jung's perspective on solitude and are recognizing your own need for inner space, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with others who might benefit from this understanding. We're creating content that honors the full spectrum of human psychological needs, including the often misunderstood need for solitude. Jung understood that forcing people into social molds that don't fit their psychological nature creates what he called neurosis, a splitting of the personality that leads to anxiety, depression, and loss of authentic selfhood. Many people who prefer staying home have experienced this splitting when they try to force themselves into extroverted behaviors that drain rather than energize them. The quality of solitude matters as much as the quantity. Jung distinguished between empty solitude, mindless scrolling, passive consumption of entertainment or rumination, and rich solitude that involves active engagement with inner life. Rich solitude includes reflection, creative expression, meditation, reading meaningful material, or simply sitting with thoughts and feelings without judgment. Jung also recognized that solitude preferences often intensify during periods of psychological transition or growth. When we're processing major life changes, integrating new experiences, or facing important decisions, the psyche naturally seeks quiet space for this inner work. The preference for staying home during these times isn't avoidance. It's psychological wisdom guiding us toward the conditions necessary for healthy adaptation and growth. The ultimate gift of embracing solitude, according to Jung, is the development of what he called psychological independence, the ability to find meaning, purpose, and fulfillment from within, rather than constantly seeking it from external sources. This doesn't mean becoming antisocial or rejecting human connection, but rather approaching relationships and activities from a place of inner fullness rather than inner emptiness. Jung observed that people who are comfortable with solitude often become the most interesting companions because they bring depth, authenticity, and genuine presence to their interactions. They're not using social situations to escape from themselves, but to share themselves. This fundamental difference transforms the quality of their relationships and contributions to community life. The integration of solitude and social engagement represents what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold and synthesize opposing forces within the personality. Healthy individuals learn to honor both their need for connection and their need for solitude, creating a rhythm that supports their psychological well-being, rather than forcing themselves into artificial patterns that create stress and inauthenticity. Jung's vision of psychological maturity includes the capacity to be alone without loneliness and to be with others without losing oneself. This balance requires what he called conscious choice rather than unconscious reaction to social pressures. When someone chooses to stay home from a genuine understanding of their psychological needs, they're exercising this mature psychological function. The preference for staying at home often reflects what Jung would recognize as an advanced stage of psychological development, the movement from external orientation to internal orientation, from seeking validation outside to finding validation within, from being driven by social expectations to being guided by inner wisdom. This shift represents not withdrawal from life, but deeper engagement with the essential aspects of human existence. As we conclude this exploration of Jung's insights into solitude, remember that your preference for quiet time at home isn't something that needs to be fixed or overcome. It's a natural expression of your psychological type and an essential component of your mental health and personal development. In a world that often celebrates constant activity and social engagement, choosing solitude can be a radical act of self-respect and psychological wisdom. Jung's work reminds us that the goal isn't to become more extroverted or more introverted, but to become more authentically ourselves. For some, this means embracing the profound value of solitude and recognizing that in the quiet moments at home, we're not missing out on life. We're connecting with its deepest sources of meaning, creativity, and renewal. Your need for solitude is not a limitation to overcome, but a strength to celebrate and protect.